Hey there, Nick Jutakis here. In this video, we're going to go over using nested variable interpolation within Docker Compose. So check it out. I've got this one compose.yaml file here, and we're using variable interpolation in many different spots, right? Anytime you see $squigglies here, we are interpolating this value here, and it defaults to this one here. This is being used in 10 or 20 different spots within this file. But let's say that you want to use nested variable interpolation. So let's take a look on how that might actually look, go over a use case, and maybe consider using it or not. Although in this case, I'm actually not going to be committing this back up because I want to keep these values decoupled, but it will demonstrate how this all works. So we have this one forwarded port environment variable here. It defaults to localhost :8000 here, and that's the forwarded port on the Docker host, right? And ports over here. And on the right-hand side of the colon, we have this port environment variable that defaults to 8000. This is inside of the container itself. This is an example Flask app. I'll leave a link to this project in the description if you want to check it out here, but it's using gUnicorn as a web server. This is a popular web server for Python. If you're using Ruby, possibly Rails as well, you might be using something like Puma, right? But yeah, in this case, there is an environment variable called port. But let's say that we want the forwarded port to also use this port environment variable as its own default here if the forwarded port environment variable isn't defined. So you can actually do nested variable interpolation just like this. So the idea is it's nested because we have this one variable here. It has its own default. And within that default, you're actually nesting another environment variable, which in turn has its own default. And this has worked on the shell for a really long time, but this feature is only available in Docker Compose v2. This is something that I wanted to use, or I remember wanting to use years ago with Docker Compose v1, but it just didn't work. But nowadays it actually does. And the benefit of this in this case here is that now if you were to go to your env file and change the port to be something else, you only need to change that in one spot. You wouldn't need to change potentially another environment variable or change the port here hard-coded in the Docker Compose.yaml file. But yeah, let's go and check it out just to see how it works here. And if I do a Docker Compose up here, you should start the project here. I'm just going to curl it down, not going to bother opening up a browser, and we should see things working here on localhost :8000 here. You can see we do get a 200 response back from the web server. Everything is good to go. But yeah, as mentioned, let's say that we want to change that port environment variable to be something else. So I can just go to the env file here. And by the way, if you are following along with this project specifically, one thing you will want to do before anything is comment out this Docker web port forward environment variable here, because yeah, that has been explicitly set in the env example file, which becomes the env file. This comment explains why, but yeah, if you scroll up somewhere in here, there is this one port environment variable. It's commented out by default. But yeah, let's change this now to port 8008 in one spot here. We'll need to restart the container. So let me just re-up things here. Cool. Okay, there we go. Now this time around, I should be able to curl port 8008 this time, because again, if we try to do 8000, it just isn't going to work because nothing is running on that port. But 8008, yep, we are back to a 200 here, which is good to go. Now there is one thing to point out that is kind of interesting here. If you actually run a Docker PS here, you'll see that this actually mentions that the port is still 8000, not 8008. But if you look at the redirect here for the ports, the syntax here, we can see the forwarded port is 8008 and it's forwarding to 8008 within the container. But yeah, that port is still 8000 there. So what's up with that one? So if we go to the Docker or the actual Docker file here, I do have this expose 8000 here in the Docker file. Technically, you don't need to update this to be a different port. This is really just documentation to, see some information about the container when it's running. So this is a really great example of, yeah, this value that you see here in the ports column isn't necessarily the actual port that your container is running on. Really, it's these ports over here. So I just wanted to call that one out in case you're experimenting on your own and you notice that this port doesn't line up here and you're wondering why something may not work. So yeah, with that said, that is nested variable interpolation using Docker Compose. If you have any questions about this, let me know in the comments below. I'll do my best to answer all of them. Also, if you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up because it really does help a lot. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.